Okay, I take that back. This might be of interest if you're running a VoIP. That will be covered in the advanced lesson. This is the next to last slide. So this is resetting port security values, and you could do this from privileged exec mode. You don't have to get into configuration mode to do this, and it's clear port security, and you can see here you have a grip of options. Read through these. I would keep in mind that clear port security all is going to clear all of the port security entries on the ports. Probably not what you wanted to do. That's kind of using a cluster bomb to kill a mosquito. You can get down to this specific MAC address as well as the specific MAC address on a specific VLAN. You can get down and clear the dynamically learned MAC addresses as well as the sticky MAC addresses as well as the statically configured MAC addresses. So you have a couple levels of granularity with this command. Very good command. It's great for troubleshooting. But use it in moderation. Woot! Here's the last slide. I bet you didn't think this was ever going to come. I'm going to pretty much just read this off to you, so if you are completely fatigued, go ahead and just read this later. But port security allows you to restrict devices on a Cisco switch on a port-by-port basis. It allows you to restrict these devices based on the layer 2 MAC address of the device or devices connected to a port. It gives you a number of options for implementing this feature. You can restrict based on specific MAC addresses, dynamically learned MAC addresses, or you can use it to simply just set an upper limit on the number of MAC addresses that you're going to allow on a particular port. That's what I use it for. I think that's really good use. As we described way back in one of the first few slides, if you can remember back that far, port security is used to solve a couple of potential, well, it's used to help solve a couple of potential security issues. The biggest of those is going to be the MAC address flooding attack. You can limit unauthorized devices. I'll touch on that in the next bit. I would suggest implementing port security with dynamic learning, which is the default, and a reasonable number of MAC addresses on each port, especially the user ports. You're going to have to come up with a reasonable number of MAC addresses on your own, but it's going to avoid MAC flooding, MAC address flooding, and it also can help avoid rogue switches and hubs. I mentioned on the user ports, you might even want to look at putting this on your trunk ports because a MAC address flooding attack can propagate from switch to switch over the trunks. So even if you just put a maximum limit as the maximum number of MAC addresses that could be used on the switch, that's good enough on a trunk. You know, like in our case, 3550 had like a 5,000 limit, so put that on the trunk and just say I don't want to learn more than 5,000 MAC addresses on this trunk. But be careful when you're dicking around with trunks because you can really mess stuff up when you're using port security. It's made more for access ports. Anywho, it's a great basic security feature. It's got enough buttons and knobs on it that you can configure a pretty tight security policy with it. Going to get down to filtering by MAC address. I would strongly suggest that you peep 802.1x, sometimes referred to as .1x, sometimes referred to as EAC. Probably has a bunch of different names out there. That's going to give you more granularity. It's going to be more complicated and more costly because you need a server, but it's going to give you a lot more granularity than port security will. I think you would probably like to go that route because you can actually keep it fairly simple with .1x and then make it more complicated as you go along. But again, this is not a .1x lecture. Just to wrap up, it's a really great security option for baseline security, and I'll reiterate for the last time that I would use it for limiting the number of MAC addresses per port and possibly per trunk to avoid this MAC address flooding attack. Alright, a special thank you for hanging around this long. I did tell you this is going to be a long lesson, but I think it's beneficial to know this. This is something that you're going to want to know for the real world. Like I said, it's probably going to be implemented in a network that you're working in, or you can become the network star by describing it and pushing to have it implemented and telling your boss or your coworkers why you want to implement this specifically for the MAC address flooding attacks. Anywho, I hope to see you on the CLI for the lab lesson. Going to go through a lot of this. That's probably going to be a long one as well. Thanks again for joining me in the Packet Lab, and as always, I hope this helps you on your route to becoming a network god.